Good evening, and you are all very welcome here tonight to our Religious Education webinar. My name is Ailish Travers, and I am the team leader for Religious Education. Accompanying me here this evening are the rest of the Religious Education team, Niall Mulpeter, Keith Young, and Micheál Scully. Tonight, Keith and Micheál are the backroom team who will be responding to any questions that may arise during the webinar. I am now going to hand you over to Niall, who is my co-presenter here this evening.
Good evening, and thank you, Ailish. Before we begin this evening, I would like to briefly talk you through some of the steps to assist you in taking part in this evening's webinar. On your screen, you will see the main presentation. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see an orange arrow. When you click on this arrow, a menu will open. From here, you can ask questions and download documents from the webinar. Throughout the webinar, we will let you know when we have to use these. Questions will form a part of tonight's webinar, and we're delighted to have this opportunity to address your questions. You can use the question function in the sidebar to ask questions or provide comments. If you think of any questions after the webinar, or you are watching a recorded version of this webinar, you can email info@jct.ie with any further questions. When we were preparing this webinar, we kept in mind the frequently asked questions we received from teachers, so hopefully many of your questions will be addressed throughout the webinar. We will have check-in moments where we can deal with questions that we haven't addressed. So, our delivery of our cluster day is finished for the academic year, and for any teachers who missed out on our day, they will be able to attend a repeat of this day in September and October. So we're just going to take a quick poll now, giving you 3 options that you can respond to. So option 1 is if you have attended the cluster day this year. Option 2 is if you're planning on attending the cluster day when it is repeated in September and October. And the details and dates and venues for this day will be with your schools next week. Option 3 is if you won't get to attend the Religious Education Cluster Day. For example, Religious Education may be your 3rd subject, or you might not be currently working as an RE teacher in schools. So we're just going to give you a moment now to fill out this quick online survey.
So it's great to see so many people online with us this evening. We'll just give another minute for the poll responses. We see they're still coming in. Okay, so we'll just close it there, and thank you for your responses. So from that, we can see that 30% of the attendees tonight have attended the cluster day this year, so you're very welcome. 62% of you are hoping to attend the repeated day in September, October. We look forward to seeing all of you then, and 8% of you won't get to attend the cluster day. So hopefully this webinar will be of good use to you in whatever context you are working. We kept that in mind when we were designing this day, that some of you might have been to day 1 and some of you might not have been to day 1. So we familiarised ourselves with the junior cycle religious education specification as our main learning intention for this evening. We also are going to consider the steps involved in collaboratively planning a unit of learning. We know that's what a lot of teachers are focusing on right now for September.
The framework for Junior Cycle 2015 has resulted in every subject moving from a syllabus to a specification. So you may have had the opportunity to engage with specifications in your other subject areas. You will notice that there are some similarities used in specifications around the area of language. For example, learning outcomes, strands, and elements. The curriculum is built on 3 distinct areas: the 8 key principles, the 24 statements of learning, and the 8 key skills. The assessment and reporting, which will be on the Junior Cycle Profile of Achievement, the JCPA, can reflect each of these elements. So within that, religious education is a subject designed for 200 hours. If you have students following the L1LP or L2LP programs, we have a linked document to show how the learning outcomes can complement the priority learning units. There are 8 principles that underpin the framework for Junior Cycle. These principles will inform the planning for, as well as the development and the implementation of Junior Cycle program in all schools. The learning at the core of the Junior Cycle is described in 24 statements of learning. Schools will ensure that all statements of learning, along with the key skills we've just mentioned, will feature in the programs of all Junior Cycle students. The NCCA have identified 6 statements of learning that have a symbiotic relationship with religious education. These are:
so statement of learning 3, the student creates, appreciates, and critically interprets a wide range of texts.
We have statement of learning 5, the student has an awareness of personal values and an understanding of the process of moral decision making.
Statement of learning 6, the student appreciates and respects how diverse values, beliefs, and traditions have contributed to the communities and culture in which he or she lives.
We've statement of learning 7, where the student values what it means to be an active citizen with rights and responsibilities in local and wider contexts.
Statement of learning 8, the student values local, national, and international heritage, understands the importance of the relationship between the past and current events and the forces that drive change.
And finally, statement of learning 11, the student takes action to safeguard and promote his or her well-being and that of others. There are 8 key skills underpinning the Junior Cycle framework. Throughout the Junior Cycle, students will acquire and enhance their proficiency in these 8 key skills. They will be brought to life through the learning experiences encountered by students and will be evident in the assessment approaches used in the classroom and in examinations. These skills are key to learning in every area of Junior Cycle and beyond. They are closely linked to the skills required at Senior Cycle and those already developed for early childhood and primary education. Like all other subjects at Junior Cycle, religious education is moving from a syllabus to a specification. As this specification is phased in, we will have CPD days to support teachers with its implementation. Ailish is now going to present us with a whistle-stop tour of the religious education specification.
Thanks, Niall. We'll begin by looking at the aim of religious education, as stated in the specification. It says religious education aims to develop knowledge, understanding, skills, attitudes, and values to enable young people to come to an understanding of religion and its relevance to life, relationships, society, and the wider world. It aims to develop the student's ability to examine questions of meaning, purpose, and relationships, to help students understand, respect, and appreciate people's expression of beliefs, and to facilitate dialogue and reflection on the diversity of beliefs and values that inform responsible decision-making and ways of living. We will now take a closer look at the content of the specification. The specification for Junior Cycle religious education is built around 3 interconnected strands that reflect the aim that we have just outlined. These are expressing beliefs, exploring questions, and living our values. We are moving from a syllabus with 6 sections to a specification with 3 strands. With the Junior Cert syllabus, we had 6 sections that we had the option to approach in a linear way, section by section. we are asked to approach the specification and the 3 strands in a non-linear way. The advantage of this is that we can build units of learning using a spiral approach where we can revisit learning outcomes to deepen student knowledge. There are 31 learning outcomes in the religious education specification. As well as the 3 strands and the learning outcomes, there are 3 cross-cutting elements. These are inquiry, exploration, reflection, and action. These elements describe both a set of skills and an approach to learning that are important for religious education. Every subject specification has strands and elements. While some subjects might have elements that link to particular strands or to particular learning outcomes, in religious education, the elements flow freely across the 3 strands and all the learning outcomes. The specification on page 10 outlines each of these elements, which we will now look at.
So the first element we're going to look at is inquiry. This element focuses on stimulating students' curiosity and promoting their engagement in a topic or question. So through a process of inquiry, students engage with a range of stimulus materials to uncover ideas, facts, information, images, and perspectives related to a topic or chosen question.
The second element is exploration. This element focuses on examining a topic or question in detail, questioning, probing, discussing, listening, imagining, interpreting, and drawing conclusions for the purpose of discovery. It also focuses on encouraging dialogue and appreciation of the diversity of interpretations and responses that may exist.
And the final is reflection and action. So this element focuses on students reflecting on what they have learned and their own experience of and/or response to the topic. It encourages students to examine what they have learned in order to gain a deeper insight and understanding. It also enables students to consider how the learning relates to their lives and/or to the lives of others, thus promoting active and responsible citizenship.
For the purposes of this specification, major world religions refers to Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism. These are the same 5 world religions that were part of the Junior Certificate Religious Education syllabus. There are, however, some differences here. In the syllabus, there were options, so you could technically leave out Section B, Christianity, or Section C, World Religions. This slide again.
And is available for you to download from the JCT website. We'll be asking you to take a closer look at this in a moment. As outlined in the specification, learning outcomes describe what knowledge, understanding, skills, attitudes, and values that students should be able to demonstrate having studied religious education at junior cycle. I'm already seeing a number of questions coming in regarding how to plan using the learning outcomes. The starting point, I suppose, for planning with the learning outcomes is to become familiar with the learning outcomes and then to use those learning outcomes to build units of learning. We'll be going into, I suppose, a little bit more detail as to how we will plan units of learning when we give a sample of a unit of learning in a moment.
Yes, and apologies again if the audio went in the middle of that. We will try and make sure that when we put this up online, the audio is all there for you. So as we begin planning for September, we're really thinking of our incoming first year students. They are actually the first group of students that will be able to engage with every subject specification at junior cycle. If we look at their religious education journey, there will be a number of check-in moments beginning with classroom-based assessment 1. This is based on a person of commitment, and this will take place towards the end of second year. The second classroom-based assessment is based on the human search for meaning. And this will take place when the students are in the first term of third year. In addition, students will complete a written assessment task related to the second classroom-based assessment, which will be submitted to the State Examinations Commission along with the final examination. The first examination for the new specification will take place in June 2022. The teaching, learning, assessment and reporting in our classrooms over the 3 years of junior cycle will be built around units of learning. As we work through these units of learning, ongoing formative assessment will help students prepare for the check-in moments that we have outlined above. When we talk about a unit of learning, we mean a group of lessons on the same topic or theme that would normally last approximately 2 to 6 weeks. Short-term planning, 1 unit at a time, is recommended.
So when we decide to build a unit of learning, we begin with reflection. We reflect on the students sitting in front of us, but we also reflect on the context in which we are teaching, our school context. With this in mind, we begin to collaboratively plan units of learning. So there are a number of factors that we could take into consideration when planning a unit of learning.
We might start with the stage of the student's learning journey, thinking about them and where they are at and maybe any prior knowledge that they have.
As teachers, we want to create engaging experiences for our students. We want the students to enjoy the learning experience, and we want to create relevant learning experiences for our students.
We may consider a thematic approach to a unit of learning.
You could design a unit of learning to link to a specific time of year related to the inter-religious calendar.
In doing all of these things, the most important thing to keep in mind is that we approach planning in an interrelated and non-linear way. So, as you can see, there are a variety of ways that a department could begin collaboratively building a unit of learning. Therefore, if we have the student at the centre and our school context in mind, units of learning will vary from school to school.
When planning a unit of learning, we start with the learning outcomes. With the learning outcomes, I suppose it's important to keep in mind that they represent outcomes for students at the end of their 3 years of study.
It's also worth noting that you may focus on one aspect of an outcome at a point in time over the 3 years. It doesn't have to be fully completed in 1 year. Instead, you may revisit a learning outcome numerous times.
And numbering of the learning outcomes is only intended to support teacher planning. So it does not imply that the learning outcomes are followed sequentially.
The outcomes are interrelated throughout the strands, and therefore a non-linear approach to planning is advised. It is important to note that there are a total of 33 action verbs that are contained in the glossary of the religious education specification. This is found on page 29 of the specification. As a starting point for planning your units of learning, we have created a poster with the 17 action verbs that are directly used in the learning outcomes. This is available on the religious education section of jct.ie. It is also in the handout tab here tonight on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to take a closer look just at some of the action verbs as an example.
So the action verbs must be considered by the students and the teacher to know what's expected. So we're just going to take a moment to reflect on some of the action verbs within our own specification. We have the first one there, appreciate.
So appreciate is to acknowledge and reflect upon the value or merit of something.
To compare is to give an account of the similarities and or differences between 2 or more items, perspectives or positions, referring to both or all of them throughout.
And consider. This is to reflect upon the significance of something.
So as Ailish has already previously highlighted, the glossary of action verbs can be seen on the specification on pages 29 and 30, and they will assist you in planning your units of learning.
We're going to just take a check-in moment, a copy of the specification. So that's a really good question. It can be viewed or downloaded at curriculumonline.ie. It can also, of course, be accessed directly from our website, jct.ie, from the religious education page, and in there it's under key documents.
Thank you, Eilish. There's another question coming in here from a good few teachers. How long should a unit of learning be? So I suppose there's no standard length with regards to a unit of learning, but we do suggest that they range from approximately 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how you collaboratively decide as a department to see that unit of learning in the context of your own school.
Yeah, and so that means that sometimes a unit will be shorter and sometimes it'll be a little bit longer, depending on the topic or theme that you're approaching. Another one here about the specification directly, asking, is there a different specification for non-exam religion? So no, there is only one junior cycle religious education specification, but it can, of course, be used for exam or non-exam classes.
We have another question around the units of learning. How many units of learning in each year? I suppose there's no set standard. As teachers plan for their students in collaboration with the subject department, the length of units of learning will reflect the number of learning outcomes in the unit and to what depth they have to be explored. Approximately, I suppose, 6 to 8 units of learning per year is likely based on the average lengths of the units.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Niall. We're getting a number of questions around the CBAs, looking for a little bit more detail on that. That's the classroom-based assessments. So maybe just to point out, the assessment guidelines have not been published yet. When they're published this summer, we will make them available under key documents on the website. What we do know, so reading directly from the specification on page 18 is where the specification talks about the classroom-based assessments. So what it says there, CBA 1 is based on a person of commitment, as we mentioned. It goes on to say that students will, over a specified time, research and report on a person who, because of their religious beliefs or worldview, has had a positive impact on the world, past or present. CBA 2 then, on the search for meaning, says that students will, over a specified time, explore artistic or architectural or archaeological evidence that shows ways that people have engaged in religious belief, the human search for meaning and purpose of life. So again, as we have more information about assessment, we will, of course, make that available.
So there's some of your questions, and you can keep your questions coming in, and hopefully Keith and Micheál will be able to get back to you, and if not, you can email info@jct.ie.
Yeah, and we'll come back and end the webinar with some more questions and answers, so do keep them coming in.
So I suppose when we bring together what we have discussed so far, this diagram on the screen represents the process of planning a unit of learning. So reflection can be the starting point, where we consider our students and our school context, and reflection is something that's ongoing throughout the whole unit of learning. I suppose the next step is to look at the learning outcomes and to select learning outcomes within or across the strands that link together to form a unit of learning. When we select the learning outcomes, we should pay particular attention to the action verbs that sit within those learning outcomes, and the decisions that we're going to have to make departmentally and collaboratively is that the key learning, what the key learning is going to be, and how we are going to assess our students throughout the unit of learning. We've 2 suggested planning templates, and they're both available on jct.ie in the religious education section. For the purpose of this webinar, we're going to use the first template as we take you through how we might plan a unit of learning. This template is also available in the handout section of the webinar. Bearing this in mind, the different suggestions here that we might like to consider when planning a unit of learning. We're now going to talk through a plan that's focused on creating engaging, enjoyable, and relevant learning experiences for our students. Eilish spoke earlier about short-term planning, And I suppose the advantage of short-term planning is when something is happening in the world, it can inspire your next unit of learning. And this, therefore, can create a relevant learning experience for the students sitting in front of us. So Eilish is going to talk us through now an example of a unit of learning.
Yes, thanks, Niall. This was recently one topic that has been in the news that is very much bringing student voice to life is the strikes for climate justice. It all started with Greta Thunberg, a secondary school student from Sweden, who highlighted our responsibility to care for the earth in a very articulate way. This is a topic that we might want to address with students because we can see how they have engaged with her message, and they share her message, in fact. We have heard the voices of students in Ireland when they took to the streets to protest in solidarity. Therefore, we might decide as a religious education department to plan a particular unit of learning to explore this topic in further detail. This is only possible if we can see the links to the topic in the learning outcomes.
So we're now going to take a moment to reflect on the learning outcomes to see where possible links might be. So if you have the learning outcomes in front of you, you can look at them now. If not, if you press the orange arrow on your screen, it should bring you to the handout panel. So click on the learning outcomes poster and it should open up on your device. So we're just going to ask you to take a moment to reflect on the learning outcomes and to try and identify what learning outcomes could be used for a unit of learning linking to climate action. You can also use the question tab to type in your suggestions. So we'll just give you 2 or 3 minutes now to explore the learning outcomes and to see if you can find any learning outcomes that may link. So we can see some of your suggestions are coming in there now. So we'll just give you another moment to reflect on the learning outcomes poster. Okay, some interesting ones coming in here, Eilish. So I can see a number of teachers are directed towards 3.8.
Yeah, 3.8, if you don't have it in front of you, I'll just call it out. It's explain how an understanding of care for the earth found in a major world religion promotes the well-being of all people and the planet and discuss its relevance for today. So that's, I suppose, a really clear link to the topic that we want to look at.
We also, from the same strand, living our values, I can see here 3.6, Eilish, coming in from a couple of teachers.
Great. 3.6, debate a moral issue that arises in their lives and consider what influences two different viewpoints on the issue. So this was climate action, climate justice is a moral issue, and it would be interesting to see the influences on different viewpoints on the issue.
Just looking across the strands, Eilish, from the second strand, exploring questions, I can see a couple of teachers have directed us towards 2.7.
Okay, 2.7, yes. Explore how the religious teachings of a major world religion address an issue of concern for the world today. So that is definitely an issue of concern. So that is a very good link.
And within the same strand there, we have, I think, 4 teachers here with 2.3.
2.3, yes. Explore how different narrative stories, religious and non-religious, express an understanding of creation, the natural world, and consider their meaning and relevance for today.
Very good. And just here, we have a couple here from our first strand, expressing beliefs.
Yeah.
1.3, I see a few teachers have directed us towards 1.3. So.
Okay, yes, 1.3 is engage with members of a faith community associated with one of the 5 major world religions studied in the specification, and show an appreciation of how the religious beliefs of the community influence the day-to-day life of its members. Okay, interesting, yes. So I suppose if there's a good influence there on the day-to-day life, that could inspire change and make a difference.
Super, and we have just maybe one more, Eilish. I can see again in the third strand, living our values, 3.4.
3.4 is investigate what living a morally good life means with reference to 2 major world religions and compare with a non-religious worldview. Okay. So a really interesting selection of outcomes there. I think it's really clear that there are many links that we could make to that topic. So it's definitely one that we could build a unit of learning around. As a team, we sat down and asked ourselves that question as well. What outcomes would we link to the topic of the climate strikes and climate justice? We will talk you through the approach that we decided to take. I suppose we decided to focus in on just 3 learning outcomes for the unit, and like a lot of you tonight, we also began with 3.8. I just think it's probably a nice obvious link with care for the earth mentioned there directly. So that was our starting point, and then as we looked through the strands, one that stood out to us, I'm not sure if it did come up there, Niall, but one that we picked was 3.1. Yeah. The reason we picked 3.1, which is examine different sources of values and ways in which the values of a person relate to their everyday life choices, their relationships, and their responsibilities to others. So I suppose that's a good example of taking a learning outcome and not feeling like we're doing the whole thing, but we're taking aspects of that outcome, particularly focusing in on how a person's values can influence their everyday life, their choices that they're making, and that responsibility to care for the earth and to care for others who we share the earth with. And as we looked at the value element, we wanted to talk about sources of values. So going back to 3.8, trying to make good links with the outcomes, we wanted to see what might be the source of the values for a major world religion who want to talk about care for the earth. And with that, we decided, like some of you pointed out, 2.3 would be a good link, which again is explore how different narratives, stories, religious and non-religious, express an understanding of creation, the natural world, and consider their meaning and relevance for today. And I suppose looking at that, we were thinking in terms of the sacred texts and creation stories being one of the reasons why the world religions do speak so clearly and strongly on this topic. Now we picked those 3, and I suppose we could have picked some of the other ones. This is the beauty of the specification. You have that flexibility and choice to bring together the learning outcomes to create and design the unit of learning that you want to engage with your students.
So we're now going to look at the area of key learning, and we're just going to present you with some of the suggested key learning that might form part of this unit of learning. So for example, we might inquire into how one major world religion responds to the issue of caring for the earth. You could explore the creation narratives and stories that influence the religious and non-religious view, understanding of humanity and the responsibility for the earth. And we might reflect on how is these religious messages relevant today, and how they promote the well-being of all people on the planet, and identify actions that they can take in their everyday life to support this message.
You can see from the key learning that what we're basing that on is the 3 learning outcomes that we selected. So your key learning will reflect the learning outcomes chosen. You might also notice that we've kept the 3 elements in mind when choosing the key learning, so students will have an opportunity to inquire, explore, reflect, and act. And the key learning that's outlined here is for the department plan, and will have to be broken down into student-friendly learning intentions for each lesson. But this is what we would have on our department plan, where we collaborate to decide on the key learning for a unit of learning.
So I suppose when we've decided on our learning outcomes and the key learning, our next step is to think about how we are going to assess students' learning. So I suppose some possible ongoing formative assessment could include students writing and sharing their own understanding of care for the earth, and this could be done to ascertain, I suppose, their prior knowledge. You could have a think, pair and share strategy about how everyday choices could impact the environment. A graphic organizer could be used to compare religious and the non-religious narratives of creation. We could create a peer teaching exercise on different understanding of care for the earth in the different world religions. That could be demonstrated through the jigsaw strategy. Effective questioning, I suppose, will be ongoing throughout each lesson within this unit of learning.
And when we're thinking about our assessment checks, we might like to design a unit task for a unit of learning. And so here's a sample one here: create a short presentation, written, oral or electronic, describing an understanding of care for the earth found in a major world religion and how this links to the creation story of this world religion. When we are building our unit of learning, we're going to, as a department, want to maybe share resources that we have that could bring this unit of learning to life for our students. For example, we might want to start with the TED Talk by Greta Thunberg. So what we did, we created a handout of possible resources relevant to this unit of learning, and that is available to you on the handout tab here in the webinar. It will also be made available on our website. Students, of course, might engage with the issue of climate action in other subjects and short courses. And it's great if they can bring that cross-curricular links into the classroom. But we want to ensure that we address this from the perspective of the religious education specification, which does offer a unique insight when we include the teachings of major world religions. It is also worth noting that while outcome 3.8 says one major world religion, or it says a major world religion, we can teach this unit to include the 5 major world religions. And again, an example of how this could work was the jigsaw activity that Niall mentioned there. That's a strategy that we actually use on our cluster day, so some of you may have had the chance to experience that. And some of you hopefully will get to experience that in September and October. But we have attached to our webinar handout the link to the JCT strategy video that explains that strategy. The idea is that you could create your own jigsaw strategy using the links we have provided. And what you'll see is the links we provided include references to the 5 major world religions, as well as some general links on the topic. So a good starting point for students inquiring, exploring, reflecting and acting.
So you will notice on the suggested templates that there's space for reflection. So as previously highlighted, reflection is an ongoing process. Reflection is the starting point when we come together as a department to plan collaboratively. But at the end of the unit, it's always a good idea to reflect individually as a teacher, and also to collaboratively reflect as a department how that unit of learning was brought to life in your classrooms.
So that really is talking you through a unit of learning, what it might look like. It's starting with an idea, a theme, something that is relevant and engaging to students, and how as a department we can come up with the key learning and assessment checks, as well as sharing resources and beginning the process of reflection. We will now have some more questions and answers. I see they have been coming in, which is great. A lot of responses. We'll give you just 2 minutes.
How much do we have to cover in first year? I suppose that we've mentioned there are 31 learning outcomes and they have to be engaged with over the 3 years from first to third year. There's no real set amount of learning outcomes that have to be completed each year, as there's no core strand which the teacher must engage with in first or include in planning. So many of the learning outcomes engaged within first year will be revisited again in second and third year. So there's an opportunity to layer the learning within the learning outcomes. Also, we have another one. What strand do first years start with? So as teachers will be approaching the strands in a non-linear and interrelated fashion, any of the strands can be commenced within first year. So I think that was clearly demonstrated tonight through our unit of learning. We looked at the topic, the relevant topic around climate change and how what learning outcomes could fit within that topic, and we saw that there was learning outcomes from across the strands. So really, as a department, you would sit down and collaboratively have those conversations.
Yeah, I think maybe important to remember that we're never doing one strand at a time. So we're engaging with all 3 strands across first year. That's not to say every unit doesn't have to have an outcome from all 3 strands, but ideally if they do, that's fantastic. Our sample here tonight, as you saw, was from 2 strands. And actually another question that I see there that links to that is asking about how many learning outcomes should be in a unit of learning. And again, that depends on maybe how long the unit of learning is going to be and what the topic is. So we had 3 tonight. That's a really good number probably for building a unit of learning. Sometimes you might have a few more, bearing in mind that sometimes it's only part of a learning outcome that you're actually engaging with. So you want to make reference to it, you want to link to it, because you're building students' religious literacy by bringing them to life and revisiting them and engaging with them as often as possible. But you may have, some main outcomes that are going to guide the unit of learning. Again, just like we say, a unit of learning shouldn't be too long. We kind of say around 6 weeks. Same way, you wouldn't want to have too many outcomes in there. We saw with this topic that we just did, there were many possible links. That doesn't mean we have to put them all in just because they do link. We then select the ones that we feel best fit together for how we want to bring those outcomes to life in that unit of learning. There's still some questions coming in about, assessment. Maybe one that we can answer at this stage around the examination. The question here is, what will the examination look like? So I suppose what we do know is that it will be a 2-hour exam. I suppose maybe the important thing, I'm not sure if we said this, it's going to be a common level paper. So a 2-hour common level paper. And that's, I suppose, what we know at the moment about the exam.
We'll take maybe one more final question, Eilish.
Okay, well, there's one here about can religion classes be part of well-being? So that is a question that we have come across a few times as well. ORI might link to well-being, but timetabled hours for well-being come from outside timetabled hours for subjects, and ORI is a subject with 200 hours. Now, if you were lucky enough to have more than 200 hours of ORI on your timetable, the extra time, the time in addition and over that 200 hours could potentially count towards well-being. It would have to be, those hours have to be written up using the Appendix I document, which you will find at the back of the wellbeing guidelines. So that would be something to look into and have a look at. Wellbeing officially that comes from the short courses and other areas of learning, like SPHE, CSPE and PE. And maybe just worth noting as well, if you had those extra hours and you wanted to include wellbeing and write up an Appendix I, just bear in mind that wellbeing is for all students. So you cannot include any aspect of ORI unless all students are participating in ORI. Okay. So I see one here as well about how can we begin preparing students for CBAs. Maybe that's just a good one to finish on, because I see a lot of questions again around assessment. Maybe just to mention that from the moment students enter your classroom, you are preparing them by the teaching and learning that you're carrying out in your units of learning. If you're using those action verbs in the outcomes and you're bringing that to life in your classroom, that is preparation. Even the language like CBA 1, a person of commitment. In first year, you could be engaging with the founder of your school community, the founder of a major world religion, a person who has done great work in the world, maybe for charity. Lots of people that could be examples of people of commitment. So you're building up the language, and if students are, again, engaging with the action verbs and the elements where they're inquiring and exploring and there's reflection and action, that is giving them both the knowledge and the skills to be ready. when that CBA comes around, that they're able to do their research and their presentation. So look, we see there's a large number of questions there, and Keith and Micheál have managed to respond to a lot of you, and they've also said to some of you already that they will follow up in the coming days with responses. So if you haven't had a chance to have your question answered, we will get back to you. Maybe it's worth remembering at this stage as well, we have it up there, info@jct.ie. So after the webinar ends, that's a good place to forward any questions to, and we will do our best to respond to everybody. But hopefully a lot of your questions were answered here tonight. So a next step, just for keeping in touch with us, we have the website up there for jct.ie, and we have our Twitter handle up there as well at jct_ORE. I would advise everybody to maybe visit the website, because that's where we put up our support material. You can join our mailing list there, which is a very worthwhile thing to do, because then as we get new information or have any news and events coming up, like this webinar, when we send that out to our mailing list. So please sign up. If you're not on Twitter, you can still see your tweets on the website, so sometimes that can give some ideas for people as we go through the year. The key documents section that I mentioned earlier, that's where you can find the specification. It's also where we will put the assessment guidelines when they are made available. We have CPD workshops, so all the material from the day. If you're part of the majority actually who are here this evening that didn't get to attend the cluster day this year, you will find the material there which might help you plan for September, and we'll obviously go through that with you if you do make it to our day in September and October. The planning part of the website, that is going to give you the templates, that, like the one we used tonight. They're just suggested planning templates. You can create your own templates for planning, but they could be a useful starting point. We'll add this recording of the webinar and any material like that handout of resources to the resources tab on our website as well.